In the middle of a quiet morning in a high school classroom, a teacher's dismissive words slice through the air, branding a young black student as hopeless. The insult echoes in front of the entire class, but instead of shrinking, the boy meets it with a calm defiance. Something in his eyes hints that this story will not end as the teacher expects. People like you don't belong in advanced math. The words were spat out like a rotten seed, landing heavy in the air of room 204. The fluorescent lights above hummed faintly, casting a pale, cold glow over the rows of desks. Outside, the wind pressed against the classroom windows, rattling them as if in protest. Mr. Holloway stood by the blackboard, marker in hand, his beige suit as stiff as his tone. He wasn't shouting. No, he didn't need to. His voice was sharp enough to slice through skin without raising in volume. Behind him, the equation from yesterday's lesson still lingered, half erased. Integral x squared cos dx. It hung there like an unanswered question, much like the one in everyone's mind right now. Did he really just say that? 25 students froze. No one dared breathe too loudly. The tension was a heavy quilt pressing over the room. Somewhere near the back, a pencil rolled off a desk and clattered to the floor. No one picked it up. Darnell Brooks sat in the second row, his notebook open, a neat line of numbers penned across the page. He didn't look up at first. His hand stilled over the paper, pen hovering mid-stroke. For a second, the only movement was the slow rise and fall of his chest. Mr. Holloway smirked, the kind of smirk that assumed victory before the battle had even begun. "You've been in this class 2 weeks, and you still can't keep up," he said, pacing slowly toward Darnell's desk. "This isn't about feelings or excuses. This is advanced placement. We don't slow down for stragglers." The word stragglers landed with the same venom as the first insult, but its real meaning wasn't lost on anyone in the room. A girl whispered to her friend, "That's messed up." Her friend shushed her instantly. Finally, Darnell lifted his head. His eyes met Mr. Holloway's with a stillness that was almost unnerving. There was no visible anger, no frown, no sudden flinch. Instead, there was something else, a steady, unblinking patience, like someone watching a storm through a closed window. "You done?" Darnell asked quietly. The teacher blinked. He'd been expecting silence, or maybe a mumbled apology. "Certainly." "Not a question. What did you say?" "I asked if you were done," Darnell repeated, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. Around them, the students shifted uneasily, some holding their breath, others staring at their notes. To avoid catching anyone's gaze, Mr. Holloway chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. "You know, arrogance is a terrible mask for ignorance." Darnell closed his notebook, not slamming it, just shutting it with deliberate calm. He stood up, and the metal legs of his chair scraped against the floor with a sound that made more than one student wince. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a single sheet of paper, creased and folded into thirds. Without a word, he placed it on the teacher's desk. Mr. Holloway glanced at it, then back at him. "What is this supposed to be?" "Something you can't solve," Darnell said. The room inhaled all at once. Mr. Holloway laughed, a hollow, humorless sound. "Is that so?" "Yeah," Darnell replied, his voice even. 50 years worth of math teachers before you couldn't either." The teacher's brow furrowed, but Darnell didn't give him time to respond. He slung his backpack over his shoulder, walked toward the door, and paused just long enough to deliver one final line without turning around. "You'll wish you'd listened before you spoke." The click of the door closing behind him felt louder than any slam could have been. In the silence that followed, Mr. Holloway unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned the problem, a dense arrangement of symbols and numbers that looked more like ancient scripture than mathematics. The date at the top read 1975. His smirk faltered. somewhere down the hall. The sound of Darnell's footsteps faded into the hum of the building. And in room 204, every student leaned forward, waiting to see what would happen next. By third period, the story had already made its way from the second-floor math wing to the cafeteria downstairs. They said he slammed the desk. No, he handed him some kind of code. My brother in college says it's a math riddle nobody's solved since the 70s. The versions multiplied with every retelling, but one thing stayed constant. Everyone was talking about Darnell Brooks. Darnell himself walked the hallway like nothing had happened. His stride was unhurried, his eyes locked forward. If someone glanced at him too long, he'd meet their gaze just long enough to make them look away. He wasn't arrogant. He just wasn't shrinking for anyone. At his locker, he swapped out his math notebook for a physics one. A folded sheet of paper, that paper, peeked from the edge of his binder. He slid it deeper without looking. Down the hall, Mr. Holloway stood in the faculty lounge, staring at a computer screen. His coffee sat untouched. He had typed the problem into an online math forum, only to be met with comments like, "This is the Greenwood conjecture. Been around for decades. Famous for being unsolved. Good luck. People have thrown supercomputers at this thing." He scrolled further. A post from 2008 claimed the problem originated at Greenwood University, where a brilliant but reclusive professor had proposed it as a thought experiment, and then passed away without publishing the solution. Mathematicians had been stuck ever since. Holloway leaned back in his chair. The idea that this kid thought he could solve it was ridiculous. Still, the way he'd said it, steady, not boastful, gnawed at him. By lunchtime, the cafeteria buzzed like a beehive. Darnell sat at the far end of a table with his friend Marcus, who was halfway through a chicken sandwich when he finally blurted out, "Bro, what was that paper?" Darnell smirked faintly. "Just a problem." Marcus squinted at him. "A problem." That made Mr. Holloway look like he saw a ghost. "He'll figure it out," Darnell said, unwrapping his sandwich, "or he won't." Marcus leaned in, lowering his voice. "You're acting like you already know the answer." Darnell didn't respond. He took a bite, chewing slowly. Across the room, a group of juniors stole glances in his direction. One of them, a tall girl in a varsity jacket, whispered something to her friend, who giggled and covered her mouth. It wasn't just students who noticed. Ms. Chun, the physics teacher, stopped by their table. "Darnell, I hear you had an interesting morning," she said, her tone neutral but her eyes curious. Darnell looked up. "Depends who you ask." Ms. Chun studied him for a moment. "If that's the Greenwood conjecture you handed him, you should know it's been a brick wall for half a century. It's no small thing to even try it." "I know," Darnell replied. Her brows lifted slightly. "And you think you can solve it?" Darnell didn't answer right away. He just said, "Some walls aren't as strong as they look." Ms. Chun nodded slowly, as if filing away the remark for later. After lunch, the whispers kept following him. In chemistry, someone slid him a note that read, "Do you really know the answer?" He crumpled it without looking. Meanwhile, back in room 204, Mr. Holloway sat at his desk after school hours, the paper spread before him. He'd tried working through the first two lines, but the variables tangled like vines. He flipped through his old graduate textbooks, searching for a foothold, and found none. He stared at Darnell's neat handwriting, precise, almost mechanical, and something about it bothered him. It wasn't the work of a kid guessing at random. Whoever had written this knew what they were doing. The bell for dismissal rang faintly through the halls. Students flooded out, their laughter and chatter fading into the late afternoon air. In the quiet, Holloway reached for his phone and dialed a number. "Hey, Alan, it's Greg. You still at Greenwood?" A pause. "I've got something you need to see." Down the block, Darnell stepped off the curb, hands in his jacket pockets. He wasn't heading home, not yet. His path took him toward the public library, its tall glass windows glowing in the orange wash of sunset. Inside, he made his way to the third floor, to a far corner where the math journals lived. He slid into a chair, opened his notebook, and began to write. If anyone had been close enough, they'd have seen that he wasn't copying problems from the journals. He was writing solutions. And on the top of the page, in careful block letters, he'd written, "For the one who said I couldn't." Library was nearly empty by the time the street lamps outside flickered to life. Darnell sat hunched over the table, his pencil scratching across the page in a steady rhythm. Each symbol flowed into the next like music, but his eyes weren't just seeing numbers. They were seeing a voice, a face, a memory. Math is like jazz, his grandfather used to say. You don't just follow the sheet, you feel it. You make it your own. The memory was from 3 summers ago. Grandpa Reggie's workshop smelled of sawdust and coffee. The old man had an odd habit, in between fixing radios and tinkering with clocks. He'd work through math puzzles clipped from magazines. Some were simple, some so dense they looked like foreign languages. One day, he'd unfolded a yellowed sheet from an envelope and said, "This one here's the Greenwood conjecture. Came out the year I graduated. Folks say it can't be solved." 14-year-old. Darnell had laughed. Then why keep it? Grandpa Reggie's eyes had twinkled. Because just 'cause the world says it can't be done, don't mean you can't do it. He taught Darnell the basics, walking him through strange patterns and elegant tricks. Darnell had struggled at first, but something about the challenge lit a fire in him. They worked on it in bits and pieces until the day Reggie passed away. And the problem remained unfinished, like an unplayed last note in a song. Now, 3 years later, Darnell was chasing that note across town. In a dim office at Greenwood University, Professor Alan Price leaned over the problem Mr. Holloway had emailed him earlier. Alan's hair was silver now, his glasses perched low on his nose. He traced the equations with his finger, muttering under his breath, "This handwriting, it's meticulous. And this line here, it's not standard notation. It's different, efficient." On the other end of the line, Holloway's voice was tense. "So? Kid's just copying something he found online, right?" Alan shook his head slowly. "No. I've studied the Greenwood conjecture my whole career. What's on this paper isn't a copy. It's progress." "Progress?" "I don't want to jump ahead, Greg, but if this holds, he's cutting through parts of the problem in ways I've never seen. If he's guessing, it's one hell of a lucky guess." Holloway swallowed, his grip on the phone tightening. "So you're saying—" "I'm saying you might have a prodigy on your hands, and you might want to treat him with a bit more respect than you've shown so far." The line went quiet for a moment. Back in the library, Darnell checked his watch. Closing time was near. He gathered his notes, stacking them neatly. But before he slid them into his bag, he took one page and folded it into thirds. This page was different. It wasn't calculations. It was an outline, a plan. Steps for the remaining solution. At the bottom, he'd written in bold letters, Step 7, the bridge. As he tucked the paper into his notebook, footsteps echoed down the aisle. It was Ms. Chun. "Darnell," she said softly, "they're closing in a few minutes." He nodded, zipping his backpack. "I know." She hesitated, glancing at the open journals. "You've been here almost every evening this week. What's driving you?" Darnell met her gaze. "Someone told me I couldn't." Her lips pressed into a faint smile. "That can be a powerful fuel. Just don't burn yourself out." As they walked out together, she glanced sideways at him. "You know, if you actually solved that thing, it could make history." I'm not doing it for history, Darnell replied. I'm doing it for someone who believed I could. That night, in his small bedroom, Darnell spread his notes across the floor. The problem sprawled like a map, each step a path winding toward an unseen destination. He worked until his eyelids grew heavy. Meanwhile, Mr. Holloway sat in his own home, staring at the printed problem on his desk. The smug certainty he'd felt that morning had evaporated, replaced by something unfamiliar, doubt. On a yellow sticky note, he scribbled a reminder: meet with Price in person, bring the original. For the first time in years, the veteran teacher felt like he might be standing in the presence of something bigger than his own authority. And somewhere in the quiet between midnight and dawn, Darnell wrote the line of numbers that would bring him one step closer to the answer. By Monday morning, the air at Lincoln High felt charged, like the sky before a thunderstorm. Everywhere Darnell went, eyes followed him, in the stairwell, in the cafeteria line, even in the library where he used to disappear unnoticed. It didn't take long for the incident to reach the principal's office. Principal Avery was a tall woman with sharp glasses and a voice that could cut through the rowdiest hallway noise. She called Mr. Holloway in first. "Greg, I've had 3 parents email me since Friday," she said, sliding a stack of printed messages across her desk. "They're concerned about what you said to this student." Holloway sat stiffly. "With all due respect, Sandra, it's being blown out of proportion. I was pushing him to perform. Some kids need tough love." "Calling a student unteachable isn't tough love," she replied flatly. "It's a label, and labels stick." He shifted in his seat. "This isn't about labels, it's about maintaining standards. He's been here 2 weeks. He's not even up to speed on." A knock interrupted him. The door opened, and in walked Darnell. Principal Avery gestured for him to sit. "Darnell, we're here to talk about what happened Friday." "I know," Darnell said evenly. "I understand you gave Mr. Holloway a math problem," she continued. "One that's unusual?" Darnell met her gaze. "It's a problem people have been trying to solve for 50 years. Holloway let out a dry laugh. "And you think you can solve it?" Darnell didn't look at him. "I think I can try without someone telling me I can't." Principal Avery watched the exchange, her expression unreadable. "All right," she said finally. "Here's my concern. Whatever this is, it's starting to distract the whole school. I need to know it's not going to turn into a circus." "It won't," Darnell replied. "Unless someone makes it one." Her eyes flicked to Holloway at that last line. "Good. Then let's keep it professional. Both of you." By lunchtime, however, the circus was already in motion. In the quad, clusters of students gathered, phones out, trading grainy pictures of the folded paper. A rumor spread that Darnell had already solved half of it over the weekend. Another claimed a professor from Greenwood University was coming to meet him. Darnell ignored most of it, but Marcus caught up to him between classes, waving his phone. "Bro, check this. Someone made a whole thread about you on Reddit." Darnell barely glanced at the screen. "Doesn't matter." "It matters if people start showing up here," Marcus said. "You're trending in the math subreddits." That afternoon, in front of a packed class, Holloway made his move. "Today," he announced, "we're going to do something different. Mr. Brooks, why don't you come up here and show us how you'd approach this?" He turned to the board and wrote a section of the Greenwood conjecture, not the whole thing, just a particularly thorny subsection. The room went still. Darnell looked at the board, then at Holloway. "You sure you want me to?" "I wouldn't ask if I wasn't," the teacher replied. Without a word, Darnell walked to the front. He picked up the marker, scanned the equation, and began writing. His movements were precise, each step building naturally into the next. He didn't rush, but he didn't pause either. The class leaned in. Even the sound of pen tapping stopped. By the time he stepped back, a clear path was drawn, not to the full solution, but through a part that many had called impenetrable. Holloway stared at the board. "That's not the standard method. It's more efficient," Darnell said. "Cuts out steps you don't need." "Or skips steps you do need," Holloway countered. "Then prove me wrong," Darnell replied. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Murmur rippled through the room. Later that evening, Holloway sat in his car outside the university, the problem still in his hands. He'd shown it to Alan Price in person this time. "I'll be honest, Greg," Alan said, handing it back. "If he finishes this, it's not just a school achievement. It's publishable." Holloway gripped the steering wheel, staring at the dark road ahead. Somewhere deep down, he knew this wasn't about math anymore. It was about control, and he was losing it. By Wednesday morning, Lincoln High felt less like a school and more like the center of a slowly forming storm. Students whispered in hallways, not just about the confrontation anymore, but about who had been asking questions. At lunch, Marcus slid into the seat across from Darnell, eyes wide. "Bro, a lady from the Tribune called my mom," he said. "She wanted to know if I was friends with you. Said she's writing an article about a local math prodigy." Darnell kept eating, unmoved. "I didn't ask for that." "I know," Marcus replied, "but stuff like this doesn't just go away. You're on people's radar now." That afternoon, Principal Avery stopped Darnell in the hall. "I had a call from Greenwood University," she said. "They'd like to invite you to a weekend symposium. You'd be working with graduate students on—" "Well, you can guess what." Darnell's brow furrowed. "Why me?" Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "You know why." "I'm not done with it yet," he said. "They don't care," Avery replied. "They want to see you work." In the faculty lounge, Holloway overheard two teachers whispering. Apparently Greenwood wants him for a summer program. At his age? That's insane. Holloway tightened his grip on his coffee cup until the lid crumpled. Later, he shut himself in his classroom and pulled out the copy of the problem Alan Price had marked up. Even with notes, it was like trying to read a language he only half remembered. Every time he reached the point Darnell had worked through, his own calculations hit a wall. The humiliation burned. He wasn't just being outdone, he was being outdone publicly. That night, the first article appeared online. High school junior tackles legendary math problem. A Lincoln High student, only 2 weeks into an advanced placement course, has reportedly made significant progress on the Greenwood conjecture, a mathematical puzzle that has stumped experts for half a century. Sources claim the student, identified only as Darnell B., stunned his teacher and classmates with an unconventional approach. Marcus sent the link to Darnell with the caption, "You're famous now." Darnell ignored it. He sat at his desk, pencil in hand, working through step 7. The bridge. His grandfather's words echoed in his head. You don't just follow the sheet. You make it your own. The next day, Holloway made his own move. "Class," he announced, "we're going to have a little competition. End of the week. Everyone will attempt a section of the Greenwood problem. We'll compare approaches. Let's see if Mr. Brooks' method holds up against standard practice." The room stirred with murmurs. Marcus shot Darnell a look that said, "He's coming for you." Darnell didn't react. "Fine," he said simply. Thursday after school, Darnell found Miss Chun waiting for him outside the library. "You know what Holloway's trying to do," she said. "Yeah," Darnell replied. "He wants to prove you're a fluke." "Then I guess I have to prove I'm not." She studied him for a moment. "Don't let him bait you into rushing. Pressure makes people sloppy." Darnell zipped his bag. "Pressure just makes me focus." Friday came faster than anyone expected. By third period, The class was buzzing. 2 large whiteboards were set up side by side, one for the standard method, the other for Brooks' method. Holloway had arranged for another teacher, Mr. Ruiz, to act as a neutral observer. "All right," Holloway said. "You have 40 minutes. Begin." The room fell into the sound of markers squeaking and papers rustling. Holloway worked his side with quick, deliberate strokes. Darnell moved slower but steadier, each line building like scaffolding. 20 minutes. Ruiz walked between them, glancing at both boards. At 30 minutes, a small crowd of students had drifted closer to Darnell's side. When the timer finally beeped, both men stepped back. Ruiz examined the work. Holloway's approach? Traditional, but stuck at the usual bottleneck. Brooks. This step here, that's new, and it works. The room buzzed. Holloway forced a smile. Interesting. But one step doesn't mean the whole thing works. No, Darnell said, meeting his eyes, but it means I'm further than you. That night, the article was updated. Update. Today, in front of classmates and staff, Darnell B. demonstrated a novel approach to the Greenwood conjecture, bypassing a long-standing hurdle that has stumped mathematicians for decades. Witnesses described the room as electric. The regional math finals were being held in the school's old auditorium, the kind with creaky wooden floors, the faint smell of varnish, and faded velvet curtains that whispered of decades past. Rows of students from different schools sat on the stage, each with a number pinned to their chest. Jamal sat in the front row, hands resting on his lap, his sharpened pencil perfectly aligned with his notepad. His number to 17 gleamed under the bright stage lights. From the audience, Mrs. Whitaker sat stone-faced, her arms crossed, as if she had come only to witness his failure. Meanwhile, Principal Harris leaned against the wall, eyes scanning the judges' table as though waiting for trouble. The moderator, a man with a calm voice and rimless glasses, stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the final round of the 10th Annual Tri-State Mathematics Challenge. Contestants, remember, accuracy and clarity are key." A large chalkboard loomed behind them. Jamal glanced at the equation displayed for the warm-up round, a differential equation with an oddly familiar structure. It was similar to one he had seen in old math journals, the kind his grandfather had once shown him. But before the real questions began, there was a commotion near the judges' table. One of the officials, a sharp-nosed man in a gray suit, walked over to Jamal's desk and replaced his answer sheet with another, one with faint, barely visible numbers already written on it in pencil. Jamal frowned. The numbers were wrong. The trap was obvious. If he copied them, he'd fail. If he erased them, it would look suspicious. He glanced toward Principal Harris, but the man's expression gave away nothing. The moderator cleared his throat. "First question, you have 90 seconds. Jamal's hand hovered over the paper, mind racing. He could hear the scratching of pencils. All around him, the tense silence of the crowd leaning forward in their seats. And then, from the row behind him, came a whisper, barely audible over the ticking of the timer. "Don't use that sheet. Check under the desk." He froze. The voice was low, steady, and unmistakably female. Without drawing attention, Jamal slid his hand under the desk and felt a folded piece of paper taped there. With a single motion, he pulled it free, placing it under his notepad. "Note read. Use this. It's clean. Trust me." The timer ticked down to 45 seconds. Jamal swapped sheets in one fluid motion, heart pounding. The real question on the board was tough. An equation involving nonlinear functions and initial value conditions, but it was solvable. He dove into the work, pencil moving furiously. When the bell rang, he had the correct answer boxed neatly on the page. As the rounds progressed, Jamal noticed that the man in the gray suit grew increasingly agitated. Each time Jamal got a question right, the man scribbled something furiously on his clipboard. Between rounds, Jamal dared to glance over his shoulder to see who had whispered to him. It was the last person he expected, one of Mrs. Whitaker's star pupils, a girl named Emily, who always sat at the top of the class and had rarely spoken to him except to laugh along with others. She met his gaze for just a second, then turned back to her notes, offering nothing more than that silent acknowledgement. By the end of the session, Jamal had made it to the final head-to-head round, just him and a boy from Northridge Academy. The crowd murmured, sensing the underdog story playing out before them. The final problem flashed on the board. Jamal's eyes widened. It wasn't just any question. It was the problem. The 50-year-old unsolved problem his grandfather had once shown him. The very one that had consumed weeks of his own quiet study at home. Mrs. Whitaker shifted in her seat, her lips pressed thin. Principal Harris leaned forward, his interest piqued. Jamal tightened his grip on the pencil. This was it. The timer started. Elijah's small bedroom was lit only by the yellow desk lamp, its glow spilling across a chaos of notebooks, pens, and crumpled drafts. His hand ached from hours of writing, his pencil dull from relentless work. Every equation, every line of logic, every careful explanation was being prepared for tomorrow, the day the world would finally see what he had done. A faint knock on the door startled him. His mother, wearing her robe, peeked in with tired eyes. "You still at it?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I can't stop now, Mama. If I make one mistake, they'll say it's because I don't belong there." She walked in, placing a steaming mug of chamomile tea beside him. "They'll say what they want, baby. You just make sure when they look at you, they see the truth." Elijah managed a faint smile. "The truth's in the math." Across town, in her well-lit living room, Mrs. Carver sat at her laptop, typing an email to the symposium organizers. Her fingers tapped with a cold precision. "It has come to my attention," she wrote, "that one of the presenting students has a record of classroom disruption and incomplete assignments. I believe it is inappropriate to grant him a speaking slot." She read the message twice, smirking at the thought of Elijah's name being quietly struck from the program before he even arrived. Then she hit send. The next morning, Elijah woke to the buzz of his phone. A new message from Dr. Whitman appeared. "Meet me at the library at 8. We need to talk before the symposium." A chill went through him. The timing, the urgency, it all felt wrong. He rushed through his morning routine, barely tasting breakfast. When he arrived, Dr. Whitman was waiting at a table near the back, his brow furrowed. "We've got a problem," he said. Elijah sat down slowly. "What kind of problem?" Dr. Whitman slid a printed email across the table. Elijah's heart sank when he saw Mrs. Carver's signature at the bottom. "She tried to get you removed from the symposium," Whitman explained. "They forwarded it to me, asking if the claims were true." Elijah's fists clenched. "So, that's it? I'm out?" Whitman shook his head. "Not yet. I told them I would personally vouch for you." They agreed, but they'll be watching closely. One slip and she'll get what she wants. That night, Elijah spread his papers across the floor. He rehearsed his presentation again and again, speaking to an empty room as if it were a crowd of thousands. He forced himself to slow down, to breathe between sentences, to meet imaginary eyes with confidence. Every so often, doubt would creep. In the memory of Mrs. Carver's sneer, the sound of her calling him unteachable echoing in his mind. But then he'd hear Dr. Whitman's steady voice, "You belong here." Meanwhile, Mrs. Carver was on the phone with a colleague. "I'm just saying," she whispered, "there's no way he came up with that solution on his own. He probably copied." It from some obscure journal. I'll be watching him like a hawk tomorrow. Her friend chuckled. You really don't want to be wrong, do you? I'm not wrong, Carver said sharply. I've been teaching for 20 years. I know who's capable and who isn't. At midnight, Elijah stepped outside. The cool air washed over him. As he looked up at the stars, tiny lights scattered like the numbers in his mind. For a moment, he imagined himself standing on that stage tomorrow, explaining his proof, and hearing the room go silent, not in disbelief, but in respect. He whispered to himself, tomorrow they'll know. And in the darkness, that promise felt like armor. The university auditorium was packed to capacity. The walls seemed to hum with the energy of anticipation. Students, professors, reporters, and even some government officials were there. Cameras lined the aisles. Microphones pointed toward the stage. At the center of it all sat a chalkboard covered in complex symbols, a web of numbers and geometric structures, so intricate it looked almost like an abstract painting. And next to it, Jamal. He stood straight, wearing a fitted suit that seemed to swallow his skinny frame. But his eyes, they blazed with quiet confidence. The moderator, a distinguished professor with snowy hair, stepped to the podium. Today, he said, his voice echoing, we witness a historic moment. For decades, the Birch conjecture has stood as one of the most perplexing unsolved problems in mathematics. Today, it has been solved by a 17-year-old student. Gasps rippled through the audience. Cameras clicked rapidly. In the front row, Miss Carter shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She hadn't expected this. She thought maybe Jamal had gotten lucky, maybe he'd stumbled on some trick. But the professor's words carried the weight of absolute certainty. Jamal began to explain his solution. At first, he spoke softly, his hands moving nervously. But as he dove deeper, the nerves disappeared. Equations rolled off his tongue as naturally as spoken language. He pointed to each step, explaining how centuries of mathematicians had gotten stuck and how he had found a way through. The audience leaned in. Even those without a background in mathematics could feel the significance. When Jamal reached the final line of the proof, he set down the chalk and turned back to face them. It's not just about math, he said, voice firm now. It's about believing in someone when no one else does. The words hung in the air. Then it began. One person standing in the back, clapping slowly. Another joined. Then another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was on its feet, the sound thunderous. A standing ovation. Ms. Carter sat frozen, her hands in her lap. The applause wasn't for her, and she knew it. Her cheeks flushed crimson as the realization sank in. She hadn't just underestimated Jamal. She'd almost destroyed his chance to be here at all. As the ovation continued, Jamal's eyes scanned the crowd and landed on her. For a moment, time seemed to slow. He didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. He just held her gaze, his expression unreadable. And in that silence, she felt something she hadn't in years. Shame. Real, searing shame.